the presentations have been very centered on communities and survivor focused. And that now brings us to how can we best tell these stories of survivors and these communities that are not just adapting but coping in ways that are bringing solutions to the forefront. For this session, I'd like to welcome Val. Are you here? Val Amiel Vestil, who is the Executive Director of Association of Young Environmental Journalists, or AYEJ. Val will be talking to us about human-centered and hope-focused climate stories. But before that, Val, we thought it was very important to get someone from the youth sector to be part of our webinar, because the climate crisis is important to everyone, but perhaps more so for the youth who have defined the climate crisis, the climate emergency as the issue of their generation. So Val, you'll share with us how the youth frame climate and environmental issues and how we can tell these stories from the framework or the lens of hope and being human-centered.
Hi, thank you, Anna. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Right. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Val Vestil. I'm the Executive Director of AYEJ, or the Association of Young Environmental Journalists. I'm a journalism educator and development worker. Thank you so much for giving a chance and opportunity for young people like me to share the work that we do in reframing stories on climate. I understand that most of us here are storytellers and media practitioners. I have some of my idols in this room. But the first few minutes of my presentation, I would just love to see and feel the energy from the crowd based on a question that I have. I will be showing two kinds of stories, A or B, and then I want to see from the Zoom chat box what kind of stories we prefer to read based on the headlines or the news items that I will be showing you, right? If everybody's game for that, can I get a thumbs up? This is what's difficult about digital talks. You never really see who you're speaking to. So at least, a thumbs up will tell me more about everyone's presence. I see a few thumbs up. Okay, I feel like everyone is game already. All right, sige. All right. Oops. Okay. Which story are you inclined to read more? Can you just type in A or B in the chat box if you are able to? You have two headlines here, two stories, same nature maybe. Is everyone able to submit on the chat box? Or hindi ko makita? Right, wait lang. Yeah, okay. So I have to, for a while, because I'm not able to see your, let me reshare. Okay, for a while. I hope I can see the chat box now. Sige, ito na lang muna because I can't see your chat box. All right. Okay. So we have around 35 people in the room right now. So I just want to know if okay, am I audible now? Okay na? We're good. All right. All right. I know I'm not in full presentation because it doesn't open the chat box. So I just like to see from everyone, okay? Again, which story are you inclined to read more? Are you inclined to read more? The first one, Paeng damage to infrastructure now at 4.5 billion. We're 35 in the room, so I'm expecting a lot of answers. And would you rather read the second one, which is DPWH to begin massive restoration efforts post Paeng? Okay, I have answers here. B, B. We have a few answers here. A, B, 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 B. Okay. A, All right. Can I get a couple more? Can I get a couple more from the audiences in this Zoom chat box? Maybe two or three more, just so I can have a sense of who I'm speaking with this afternoon. B, A. Okay, we have a mixed group here. Okay. Second question. Which story are you inclined to read more? Here. Right. So we have two headlines here. Environmental defenders in PH need more protection as work endangers their lives. Or is it B, PH most dangerous in Asia for environmental defenders? Which kind of story are you inclined to read more? Okay, keep them coming. A. All right. B. All right. Interesting. We have a mixed crowd this afternoon. B. All right. Almost done. On to the third one now. Okay. Which story are you now more inclined to read? How film and TV can help change the climate change battle, or not enough mention of climate on TV study reveals? Which would you prefer to read more? A. We have a few answers. Thank you. Keep them coming. A. This is just a warm up, so I can really sense who's around. All right. A. We have one B there. A. All right. Thank you so much. And so finally, the last question I have is this one. Which story are you inclined to read more? Is it A or B? PH climate activist detained. Parents seek justice. Or PH climate activists lobby for heightened protection in upper house bid. A or B? All right. A, A. Okay, we have a lot of A's down there. A. Okay, it's nice to get a sensing really of from being a storyteller to just being an audience member and a reader. What kind of stories would you be more inclined to read? Thank you so much for your participation, everybody. And it's nice to get a feel of the kind of stories you prefer to read. Let me just present this now full screen because it's been a problem on the Zoom chat. Right. Thank you for participating. And I've been invited by IOM to talk about our work in AYEJ of why and how we tell hope-based and human-centered stories about the climate crisis. I think much has been said from the previous speakers about the doom and gloom perspective, about changing narratives. And I feel like this presentation specifically will emphasize that. And we'll just try to break that down even more in terms of how we are able to do that and why we are doing that in the first place. I think that's the first question. Why? Why do we need to tell hope-based and human-centered stories about the climate crisis? Why can't we just report on data and science and that the world is burning and that sea level is rising and that livelihoods in the coasts are being threatened by the climate? Why do we need to not transition really, but why do we need to practice reframing or re-angling the way we tell stories in a way that's hope-based and human-centered? Most of my presentation this afternoon is not prescriptive. It's rather just a sharing of what we have been doing at the Association of Young Environmental Journalists and why we do it. This is going to challenge already existing journalism principles, but we thought it's worthwhile since we're running out of time and we want to talk about reframing and re-angling and telling the narrative that is going to help us in the long run. So I hope you come into this presentation with an open mind of how we can and why we tell hope-based and human-centered stories about the climate crisis. Maybe our jump-off point is a study by the Harvard Humanitarian Initiative. They conducted this study in 2017, I'm not sure, 2018, but they published it in the climate management academic journal in 2020. And this surveyed Filipinos. And the study of Harvard Humanitarian Initiative showed that there's a low level of climate change awareness among Filipinos. And I think this is needless to say that my first reaction was, what? How come? How come there is a low level of awareness of climate change when the Philippines is one of the world's most vulnerable countries to the crisis? In fact, in the Global Risk Index, we rank second to the most negatively impacted following Japan. So there's so much loss and damage in the country, but why is the level of awareness not up to par to the gravity and level of the way we are being hit by the crisis? And in even more irony, it showed in the same study that while there's a low level of climate change awareness, there's a high level of concern on the impacts of climate change. From a development worker and from a communications practitioner, I feel that there's a gap here. I'm not a scientist. I haven't done research on this, but this is just a hypothesis that I want to test for in my further studies in the future. There's a low level of awareness, but a high level of concern. I feel like there's mismatch. And I feel that where this comes from is because of the way we cover climate stories in the media. And these are screenshots of front page stories of mainstream media outlets that I look up to and that I get inspiration from. This was a day after Typhoon Sendong happened, tropical storm Sendong rather, happened in Cagayan de Oro, where I currently am based, and this is where I live. And this is the kind of stories that get out, of course, after crisis. But the question I had when I was just a college student back then is, why do we only talk about the environment when crisis has hit us? Why only now when the flood is done and the bodies have been taken away and we have death already? And I felt that as a communication student back then, the way we covered stories of climate is coming from not only the doom and gloom, but really this is more of crisis reporting rather than environmental reporting. And I know there's a lot of news sense in reporting crisis, but then does this really instigate awareness or does this instigate concern? And I think that would lead into the results of the study. This kind of observation I've had kind of re-echo what that study had. And there is new knowledge and research on eco-anxiety. Raise your hands if you've ever felt eco-anxiety. I feel eco-anxiety every day with my work in environmental journalism. And eco-anxiety is basically the chronic fear of environmental disaster that comes from observing the seemingly irrevocable impact of climate change. In short, eco-anxiety is fueled by feelings of hopelessness and helplessness because people and audiences feel that we're out of time, we're all going to die anyway, the world is burning, and that I can't do anything about it. It's Herculean to fight the climate crisis. And so I think it's primarily connected to the ability of storytellers, producers of information to create that information. In the digital news report of 2021 by Reuters Institute, they found that there is a percentage of people ages 18 to 35 who actively avoid news. And nandito yung age group ko. This is my age group, 25 to 34, the highest, 42% actively avoid news because it's bad news, because it's news that they can't do anything about. It's news that really just instills fear on people when they read about it. And much of climate reporting and environmental reporting we see in our work is negatively treated. And that becomes problematic because according to the agenda setting theory of the media, The media has the power to set the agenda of a community, meaning whatever we consume on media, whatever we talk about on media is how we talk about it in our coffee table conversations, during dinners with family. And while there's that kind of like bad news in the way people avoid bad news, there is opportunity. Maybe crisis sells because media is a business. Maybe conflict sells, but climate stories also sell because in the same report, in the digital news report, they reported that in the Asia Pacific, the Philippines is the top country surveyed that have a population that is interested in climate news. This means that there is a market opportunity to tell climate stories. And because there is a market opportunity to tell climate stories, because we know there is at least 52% readership on climate and environmental stories, we now need to reframe or improve upon how we tell them well. Because there is that opportunity, especially in the Philippines. When I saw this report, I was like, wow, 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 we need to take advantage of this. So the challenge that my organization and maybe the challenge that I encourage storytellers and journalists here to do or to answer is this: how might we question? So how might we write and report on climate stories that inspire courageous action instead of instilling fear? Because I've learned in our work and engaging with young people on the ground that fear paralyzes people. Fear paralyzes young people. So if we need people to act on climate crisis, on environmental degradation, maybe it would pay and maybe it would have value to reframe the way we tell stories in a way that inspire action instead of making them fearful for what's to come. And this is precisely our mission at the Association of Young Environmental Journalists, or AYEJ. We train young people to write more positive stories, more hope-based stories. And it all started in 2017 in Dumaguete City when we invited young people to write stories about the environment. And they were met. They were actually, the stories that they wrote were not only accepted in the in the campus publication, but also in the community newspapers. Editors of the local community newspapers loved the positive stories of the environment, and they were actually looking for stories written by AYEJ. So there is that demand from editors in the local level, but there is no supply. And that's why AYEJ exists. So ever since we started in 2017, up to 2019, we have trained around over 1,000 aspiring and emerging journalists with different agencies. And we've even worked during the pandemic with DepEd Central, Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Service, to have its first virtual 6-week training workshop on environmental journalism. And they produced, we trained 100 school paper advisors and campus journalists on how to write a hope-based environmental story. And we were incredibly, I don't know if impressed is the word for it, but we were inspired actually by the kinds of stories that young people have written. And we have this database of stories. And let me tell you, it has been difficult to sell this to editors of mainstream media outlets. I don't know if it's the editorial agenda or priority, but we have these kinds of stories and we need more people to know about it and hear about it. And these are very local, community-based, because these come from the actual kids from Cabanatuan, from Antipolo. My cat says hello. Hello. Okay. Thank you for disturbing me. So these stories come from children and written by young people. And while there has been sort of difficulty selling this to editors, we have strong allies such as Rappler or Inquirer and even Mongabay who have written these kinds of stories and published it in the mainstream media. And we were a bit frustrated because we had many stories that were not published. And then we told ourselves, if it's not being published in the national mainstream media, let's publish it on our own website. Let's create our own website. And so we soft launched ayej.org, but it's still a work in progress. But you can visit that, ayej.org. But most of our stories are there. And so because we're now done with we're slowly opening up. The economy is opening up. We're going back to face-to-face workshops. So we do capacity building trainings with indigenous youth communicators, with campus publications as well. And we also have done work with Internews and Earth Journalism Network to connect young storytellers with experts in the environment. We even find value in TV and film and animation that put a positive spotlight on environmental stories. And we invite them over to talk with young people as well. This is during the pandemic. We also build and create, we produce documentaries that take a look at how women entrepreneurs of Negros take advantage of cloth waste and use it to improve their livelihood. We also work a lot with Forest Foundation to take a look at forest champions and conservationists and see the work that they do in Bukidnon and Misamis Oriental. And we're also partnering with Knowledge Channel to air a TV magazine episode that puts a spotlight on forest conservation. And so we go back to how might we write and report on climate stories that inspire courageous action instead of instilling fear? And this is actually adapted from the work of Thomas Coombs, who coined hope-based communication. And we have used it in our work at the Association of Young Environmental Journalists. And it's really about the shift in the way we tell the story. So the first shift that we would like to introduce is from problems to solutions. You know, the danger of putting so much focus and energy and attention on just crises is that people become used to it and people almost become desensitized by it. When we just focus on the problem, we do not allow our readers to engage with the problem through the solutions that they can do. I think in our work in AYEJ, we have learned that young people, young audiences have really transitioned from being passive readers to being proactive consumers of information, in a sense that they want to know how they can help. Okay, I know this is a big problem. I know these are the issues. So what can I do? What solutions can I engage with now to help appease the situation or help appease the problem? That's why the first one here is essentially the same story, the damage of Paeng, and different kinds of, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying that in our work, we have started to shift and say, this is the story. What angle can we take advantage of that will inspire courageous action? So having this shift may help convince people that, hey, another world is actually possible, you know, because visionary ideas or institutions like DPWH, by the way, this is just made up, are placed out there and are existing. You know, I love it when Thomas Coombs mentioned that stories of impending doom and gloom in the environmental movement created despondency instead of urgency. The second shift kind of that we use in our work is shifting from threats to opportunities. Conflict is divisive. Drama is divisive. In fact, Filipinos love drama so much. We can see it in our primetime teleseries now. But seriously, when we can better angle our story that will allow our readers to be inspired from an opportunity or take part in an opportunity, wouldn't that be a better way to encourage them to take action instead of using threats and guilt to make them act? I read that a 2018 report insists that media landscape accentuates conflicts and threats, but they downplay solidarity, the opportunity that people have created to engage. So in the same manner, this is actually a real study that just came out this month, I believe, about they did a content analysis of how many times film climate change was mentioned in film and TV. And it was about 2.8% um, only of film and TV content mentioned climate change. And instead of being threatened by that study, why don't we take that study and see the opportunity that it can have? And the headline to the right is actually published by Philstar. So I'm glad that Philstar took on that angle instead of saying this study just, told us that less than 3% of film and TV talk about climate change. The third shift is from pitying victims to supporting heroes. In this change of narrative mindset, we are taught that instead of inducing pity for victims as communicators, what if we offer people an opportunity to side with heroes? Sabi nga, it was said kanina that there needs to be shift in the way we label climate refugees because that might be offensive to them. Because yes, that's true, because it's the way people are presented. The way that people are presented might induce fear or stigma or pity or anger. And this really leads to the dehumanization of people. And as journalists, I think we have a moral obligation to ensure that our stories do not dehumanize people, because people are at the forefront of change and effort. And so we need to take a look at them as heroes. The principle is, if we want people to be compassionate on these issues like migration, we have to show them other people being compassionate as well. So instead of writing about pity for victims, and I think that's seen here, let's look at the heroes. Let's look at what is being done. Let's look at the personalities who are doing incredible work to make sure that negativity is being reversed. Final shift that I would like to share with all of you that we do also is the shifting of from against to for. Let's shift our narratives to what we oppose into what we stand for. I think that's the final shift I want to share with all of you. And that's really, what are we scared of? What are we against? We are against environmental defenders being taken advantage of, being killed, their lives being taken. But if we shift the narrative to, okay, we are for the protection of environmental defenders, we are for the protection of indigenous people, maybe, just maybe, if we phrase this in a way that's more positive, that's more enlightening, in a sense that inspires courageous action, maybe that might help really do some big level, high level changes in terms of policy or just in terms of readership. And as I present these shifts, probably you have notes of yourselves. And when I first saw this shift, I was like, there's some problematic aspects about these. And there are some aspects that I had to unlearn. But in our work also, we realize that we need to talk about what hope-based communications is not. We need to emphasize, and as journalists and writers and storytellers, just because we shift from negative to positive, from problem to solution, from threat to opportunity, does not mean it is toxic positivity. Hope-based communications is not falsifying facts. Just because we want to shift the narrative doesn't mean we should change the way the story is currently. Maybe we change the way the story, maybe we find another angle to the story to fit with the shift, but we do not falsify facts in order to just fit into that shift in narrative. Hope-based communications is also not pretending that everything is okay. It is not burying your head in the sand and pretending that everything is okay. What I want to emphasize is that we bring in issues and concerns in our stories, but that is not central to the story. That is not the driving plot, so to say, in movies. We do not ignore that sea level is rising. We do not ignore that Manila is sinking 7 times faster than sea level is rising, which is a fact, by the way. We actually acknowledge this in our hope-based stories, but we do not center our stories around them. Okay? And hope-based communications is also not avoiding holding people to account or holding power to account. It's not glitz and glamour, hey, positive, think positive. Let's not demand justice. Let's not demand fairness in our work. Let's just, talk about the rainbows and butterflies. No, hope-based communications is not that. Hope-based communications is offering people in power access to opportunities, access to decisions, access to the kinds of policies that will be pro-planet and pro-people. It's really about the way we frame these kinds of stories. So, and this is how we do it in AYEJ with the way we train our young people is we focus on these 4 shifts, from problems to solutions, from threats to opportunities, from pitying victims to supporting heroes, and from talking about what we oppose to what we stand for. And really, when you take a look at the bigger picture, this is a shift in readership from fear to hope. And as storytellers, if we become that vehicle for young people to see these climate issues as not something to fear, but something to take action on and encourage them to do it, then I think we would have done a very good job at telling the stories that truly matter. And so that's why at AYEJ, we always want to let the earth be heard. And Jane, this is from The Optimistic Environmentalist by David Boyd. This quote I saw, Jane said about David, "Is there hope for the future?" Jane said, "Yes, because of the energy and commitment of people who know the problems and take action to solve them. And because of the power of the human brain for good when it is in harmony with the human heart." Let's make sure we put heart, we put humans, and we put hope in the center of our stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Val. I'm seeing still some reactions of applause here. That's for your presentation and also for your kitty. What's the name of your cat?
Finn is the name of my cat.
Finn. We'd like to thank Finn also for joining us. He or she was getting some reactions there as well. Val, you brought up some really concrete, I don't know how to frame it, but it's like I could somehow better imagine or put a label to what the youth must feel when they say that the climate crisis is the issue of their generation. When you mentioned eco anxiety, I mean, I feel that too. And I'm sure everybody here who has talked about the climate crisis and how personal it is or has experienced it will also feel that way or understand what some form of eco-anxiety feels like. But you also said that stories that we can reframing the stories about the climate crisis should be so that we have stories that are not just inspiring, but that inspire courageous action. All right, we fight against that. The fatalism that is somehow induced by eco-anxiety is what I really took away from your presentation. And there's so much energy there. There are also, though, lots of questions about how to frame hope and how to temper it. It's not natural always for journalists to focus on solutions, right? It's more of drawing attention to accountability. So we'll get to that later when we have the panel discussion with the speakers. But we had such good presentations today from Maureen, Dr. Lau, Rupert, and Val. And there were some exciting case studies also presented about the communities and what they are doing to make themselves resilient and to cope with the climate emergency.